Hello, listeners. This is Mike, your host. If you are enjoying these archive episodes, please consider supporting the podcast by going to the homepage, spacerockethistory.com, and clicking on the orange donate button or the Patreon link. Hopefully, with your support, I can continue to release these archive episodes. Thanks.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
My feet out. Okay, I'm out.
How does it feel for the United States to be the new record holder?
At last, huh?
When that baby lights, there's no doubt about it.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello and welcome. This is Michael Annis, your host, and you're listening to episode 187 of the Space Rocket History Podcast. And now, Apollo 10 Lunar Module Pilot Eugene Cernan.
I flew in space 3 times, had a chance to walk around the world a couple times on Gemini 9. That was a pretty exciting time because that was the second time an American had ever been out in space outside of a spacecraft. That because I'm probably lucky I'm even back here to talk about it today. Went to the moon on Apollo 10. We were sort of the pathfinders for Apollo 11. We took the lunar lander, only second crew ever to go to the moon, and we came close. We came down within about 47,000 feet. Had a few trials and tribulations on that flight as well, and painted that line in the sky for Apollo 11 and for Neil Armstrong and his crew to follow. It wasn't quite that easy for him, but at least we made it a little easier. It might have been. Another big part, although I didn't fly this mission, of backing up Alan Shepard on Apollo 14. Just 10 years earlier, I was a young naval aviator, young lieutenant in the Navy on the West Coast. Just back from a couple cruises, and Alan Shepard was headed into space. Now become obviously an American icon, but he was our answer to the Soviets. He was our answer to Sputnik, to Gagarin, and he was our first steps into space. And I watched him like every other American did, in awe, and indeed in envy as an aviator, knowing that by the time I was qualified to do that kind of thing, all the pioneering would be over. And lo and behold, I found myself in the space program not too many years after that, and within a period of 10 years, almost to the month, I was standing next to that same Alan Shepard the night before he went to the moon on Apollo 17 with the spotlight glistening off his 38-story Saturn V. I was standing there, having already flown twice, walked in space, and gone to the moon. And Alan had a grand total of some 16 minutes in space from his first Mercury Redstone flight. But yet there I was, 10 years later, as Alan Shepard's equal. And it took me those 2 flights, quite frankly, to bring him up to his level. But things can change quickly in life. I ended up going to the moon and got turned on an opportunity to walk on the moon in Apollo 16. Because somehow, and maybe it's that fighter pilot, attack pilot spirit in me, I wanted my own command, a command I wasn't able to have because I chose to go on the astronaut program and leave my standard path, career path in the Navy. And I was lucky enough to get the command of Apollo 17, and it turned out to be the last flight to the moon. We knew it would be before we left. And lived on the moon in a valley surrounded by mountains on 3 sides that are higher than the Grand Canyon is deep. Found my own little Camelot for 3 days with a geologist scientist who was my crewmate, and a very worthy crewmate, as a matter of fact. And an experience that in those years that isn't comparable to anything you might imagine. And when I stood on the surface of the moon and look back at the Earth, stood on the surface of the moon in sunlight and look at the Earth surrounded by the blackest black that you can conceive in your mind. A paradox, but on the moon it's truth. And I could look at the world from pole to pole and across oceans and continents, and it You know, we're in a bland environment of the moon where everything is gray, and there's the multicolored blues of the oceans and whites of the snow and the clouds. Watch it rotate on a mysterious axis you couldn't see but you knew must be there. Watch it move through the heavens, through this infinite blackness of time and space, with purpose and with logic. I came to the conclusion it was just too beautiful to have happened by accident. There must be something we don't know, and I felt very privileged to be there at that moment in time and tried to grasp subconsciously or consciously everything I could out of that moment.
That was Gene Cernan reflecting on his life experiences. This episode I'm continuing from last week, the introduction of the Apollo 10 crew. This episode, of course, will cover Gene Cernan. Now, I could not hope to cover Gene's life as well as his autobiography, The Last Man on the Moon, or the movie of the same title. But I did try to find some audio clips and info that some of you may not have heard. As I'm sure you know, Gene Cernan is a retired United States naval officer, naval aviator, electrical engineer, aeronautical engineer, fighter pilot, and NASA astronaut. He traveled into space 3 times as pilot of Gemini 9A in June 1966, as lunar module pilot of Apollo 10 in May 1969, and as commander of Apollo 17 in December 1972, the final Apollo lunar landing. Cernan also served as backup crew for Gemini 12, Apollo 7, and Apollo 14. But let's start at the beginning. Eugene A. Cernan was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 14, 1934. His father was Slovak and his mother was Czechoslovakian. Cernan grew up in the suburbs of Bellwood and Maywood, Illinois. As a child, he was fascinated by the black and white movie-tone newsreels that played in the cinemas during the Second World War. He loved the reports about brave U.S. pilots, and he knew he wanted to join their ranks. Here's Gene reflecting on his early life.
I came from a family not different than anyone else in this room or in this country, quite frankly. Spent a lot of time on a farm in Wisconsin, learned a lot of lessons from my parents, some of my teachers, and was able to get an education, had a dream. And I hope this is an inspiration to young kids, because I had a dream, and I wanted to dream about flying airplanes off aircraft carriers. I mean, that's the only thing I wanted to do. I grew up in World War II, and that's what I watched. That's what I wanted. Committed myself to that dream, made it come true, and lo and behold, I found myself standing on the surface of the moon.
But when Alan Shepard became the first American in space, Cernan decided he wanted to be an astronaut. He was selected in the 3rd group by NASA to work on the Gemini and Apollo projects. In personal data, Cernan met his wife, Barbara, in 1959. The two were married in 1961 and had one child, Teresa. However, his first marriage ended in 1981. Cernan told CNN that his wife, Barbara, got tired of being Mrs. Astronaut. Here's what else Cernan said.
What happened at home? My wife once said, if you think going to the moon is hard, you ought to try staying home. Think about that for a minute.
In 1984, Cernan met Jan Nana, who became his second wife in 1987. They had 3 daughters. Cernan was well liked by his co-workers too. Flight director Gene Kranz wrote that Cernan was his favorite because of his carefree and jovial attitude and unabashed patriotism and his close personal relationship with the flight controllers. Astronaut Mike Collins wrote that Cernan was relaxed, jovial, and a pleasant companion. Now let's move on to Cernan's education. Like most astronauts, Cernan was a very well-educated man. He attended Proviso High School in Maywood, Illinois, and graduated in 1952. After high school, he entered Purdue University, where he became a member of the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering in 1956 and was commissioned as a U.S. Navy officer through the Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps at Purdue. Cernan earned a Master's of Science degree in aeronautical engineering from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School at Monterey, California. Cernan received an honorary Doctorate of Law degree from Western State University College of Law in 1969, an honorary Doctorate of Engineering from Purdue University in 1970, and Drexel University in 1977. Now we'll move on to Cernan's flight experience. Gene entered flight training after he graduated from Purdue in 1958. He became a naval aviator, flying FJ-4s and A-4 Skyhawk jets in Attack Squadron 126 and 112 at the Miramar, California Naval Air Station, and subsequently attended the Naval Postgraduate School. Cernan logged more than 5,000 hours flying time with more than 4,800 hours in jet aircraft and over 200 jet aircraft carrier landings. Captain Cernan has logged 566 hours and 15 minutes in space, of which more than 73 hours were spent on the surface of the moon. Now, let's move on to his NASA experience. As I mentioned before, Captain Cernan was chosen among the third group of astronauts selected in October 1963 by NASA to participate in Projects Gemini and Apollo. On June 3, 1966, Cernan occupied the pilot seat alongside of command pilot Tom Stafford on the Gemini 9 mission. During this 3-day flight, the spacecraft achieved a circular orbit of 161 statute miles. The crew used 3 different techniques to effect rendezvous with the previously launched Augmented Target Docking Adapter. And Cernan, the second American to walk in space, logged 2 hours and 10 minutes outside the spacecraft in extravehicular activities. The flight ended after 72 hours and 20 minutes with a perfect re-entry and recovery as Gemini 9 landed within 1.5 miles of the prime recovery ship USS Wasp and 3/8 of a mile from the predetermined target. Now I have a clip of Tom Stafford speaking on Gemini 9 at a tribute dinner for Gene Cernan.
And so anyway, here was Gene. He was going to be the first one to walk completely around the world outside and fly this Air Force rocket pack with hydrogen peroxide thrusters and do all these efforts out there. Very unique. And it was really not a good way to simulate it. So he got out, he was huffing, puffing, and I was, pressurized in there flying the Gemini spacecraft. He was torquing me all over. We continued on. Went to the back, and he said his back was burning up. Well, it turns out his suit had ripped on the inside, the insulation, the sun flux. Gave him a second-degree burn. And then the moment that the sun went down, boom, he fogged over, could not see. And once he learned to do it blindfold, but once he got in the backpack, I only had one way of two-way communications. And, we didn't have continuous coverage. Every now and then we might pick up a station for 3 to 5 minutes. And we're out over the Indian Ocean, see the Southern Cross coming up. And I was like, damn, it's lonely out here. Here's my buddy, 20 feet back. He's fogged over, can't see. One way of two-way communications. It is really lonely out here. And so I told him, at least I had the one-way transmission to hook back up to the other umbilical. And if the sun came up within 10 minutes, we'd call it quits because we couldn't go into the next darkness. Well, Gene had really huffed and puffed and got back in. He describes it very well in his autobiography called The Spacewalk from Hell. I describe it too, slightly different, my viewpoint. But it was still tough. It was darn tough. And Gene did a heck of a job. We got him back in the spacecraft. He lost 10.5 pounds in 2 hours and 5 minutes inside. And I don't recommend that for a weight loss program. But from every problem you have solutions, and from solutions you therefore go in to find better ways to do it. So he said we need tethers, we need right foot restraints, all this, and so it was one heck of a time. Gino and I are looking at this rebuilt AMU engineering model, just thinking today that maybe it was a good thing he didn't fog over. He didn't get cut loose in that because he had to do all these things there. And the backup thing was to grab a hold of the docking bar with one hand and try to unhook from that thing, which would have been a real bear. So anyway, Gino, you did a heck of a job there. And also, just one minor thing, on the splashdown, only about 2 weeks before the launch, we had second-guessed this new software pack. And we called the captain of the ship. They didn't have GPS. They had rudimentary LORAN, said, we'll be on the spot if you'll be there. And Gino was reading the nomographs. I was flying the spacecraft through the reentry. We splashed down 0.38 nautical miles from the aim point, or about 8 football field lengths, which was the closest of any Gemini or Apollo mission. Gino, buddy, we've been through a lot together for 45 years plus. We both around in Gemini, and also when we're around the moon too. And also a few times on the ground we had sometimes. Old friend, I've got something. I was walking through through this wonderful show today, and I saw something. I said, this would be appropriate for my great dear friend, Gene Cernan. So, Gino, just remember that great mission we had 45 years ago. I bought this gift for you.
Uh-oh. This was not part of the program. Will it break? I've never got a present from Tom Stafford in my life. It's soft. Okay, let me just say, Tom, I really appreciate it. I know you get my interest at heart. Oh my God. It's a Buzz Aldrin Rocket Hero t-shirt.
All right. On Gene Cernan's second space flight, he was lunar module pilot of Apollo 10 from May 18th through the 26th, 1969. Apollo 10 was the first comprehensive lunar orbital qualification and verification flight test of an Apollo lunar module. Cernan was accompanied on the 248,000 nautical mile sojourn to the moon by Thomas P. Stafford, spacecraft commander, and John Young, command module pilot. In accomplishing all the objectives of this mission, Apollo 10 confirmed the operations performance, stability, and reliability of the command and service module, and lunar module configuration during translunar coast, lunar orbit insertion, and lunar module separation and descent to within 8 nautical miles of the lunar surface. The latter maneuver involved employing all but the final minutes of the technique prescribed for use in an actual lunar landing, and allowed critical evaluations of lunar module propulsion systems and rendezvous of the landing radar devices in subsequent rendezvous and redocking maneuvers. In addition to demonstrating that man could navigate safely and accurately in the moon's gravitational fields, Apollo 10 photographed and mapped tentative landing sites for future missions. Here's Gene speaking on Apollo 10.
Apollo 10. We tried to build on 8, I've been going to the moon, and that was our objective, to go to the moon. And on 9, we flew the lunar module in Earth orbit to make sure it could fly. And so we took those 2 flights, took the lunar module, Snoopy and Charlie Brown, and went to the moon and tried to make sure the lunar module would work in the thermal environment. Someone asked Neil yesterday, how cold does it get on the moon? How hot or how cold do you want it to be? What is it? I don't know. Minus 150, plus 250, depends on the shadow or the shape the lunar module had to perform. And if you see these, it looks like a Rube Gold. The skin is about that thick on a lunar module. A command module is like one of these things we rode around in yesterday. What do you call them? Rhinos and what? No, not the rhino. What's the other one? The MRAP. MRAP. But the lunar module was made out of sheets of titanium and aluminum that are about that thick. It's a totally didn't have to fight the environment. Didn't have to be aerodynamic. We could strap anything we wanted to the sides. Talking about 17, where we strapped a few other things to it later. But this all had to be checked out. Did it work communications-wise? Could we talk to the ground independently? Could they track 2 vehicles? Could we talk to each other? Could we rendezvous around the moon? Why is that different around the moon and around the Earth? The dynamics are different. We're involved in a different gravity environment around it. And all those things had to be checked out. Fortunately, all of them worked well. I guess going back, and Neil would deny this to the day he dies, but our real, at least as the crew of Apollo 10 thought, was to paint that line in the sky so that 2 months later, Neil wouldn't get lost. I don't know whether it worked, but he found the moon. And we left the hard part, quite frankly, to Neil. We went down to 47,000 feet a couple times to photographs of his landing site. Obviously, Mr. Boulders is going to talk about a little later. And checked out everything. It all worked out well. But as it will have it, every once in a while, as good as we are, as you are, you might make a mistake. You practice do everything the way it's supposed to be done. You train in simulators for every possible contingency or emergency. And yet, if it doesn't happen by itself, the crew will make it happen. And that's what happened in our flight, because between Tom Stafford and myself, we were simulating the staging on the surface of the moon that Neil would have to work, and we had a guidance switch in the wrong position. And we went, pardon my expression, but ass over tea kettle. Several times the lunar horizon went down this way through a window and that way through a window, and because it was basically a test flight and preparing for the landing, we were on box, open mic. Not only did Mission Control hear us, but the whole world.
This was the beginning of the media being able to hear live what was going on up there. Live.
Live. And, we took color television, too, for the first time, and won an Emmy for taking a picture of that Earth that you took a picture of. We put it on television. Anyway, so Tom Stafford, being an outstanding Air Force pilot, that was hard to say.
Remember, they were all naval aviators. Just remember that.
I was able to take control manually, and we docked it, went on, and through the rest of the mission. But during that open box, when it happened so quick, and I just said to Tom, golly, what the heck happened?
Or words to that effect.
Now, Tom Stafford is from Oklahoma. Anyone from Oklahoma? You mumble?
I've met him.
Tom, you met Tom. Did you understand what he said? He was speaking English now.
All of us, right?
Yeah, I know. Well, you did understand. Well, Tom mumbles. And by the way, Tom flew the Apollo Soyuz flight and learned to speak Russian. I would love to understand Russian and see what he sounded like in Russian. Tom mumbles. And
it's Oklahomsky.
And I know what he said, but no one else understood what he said. So if you think golly gee whiz was bad, you should have heard what he said. And there's only one person who really knows at this point in time. Anyway, we ended up coming home. I think it was 8-day flight. I won't say it was routine from there on, because I don't care how many times it's done. If you're doing it, it's always the first time. And it was a great experience, and one of the most significant memories of that flight and my flight that followed was to be what Jim talked about, just to be out there a quarter million miles away and look back home, look at your identity with reality, and try and cope with it all, try and put it all together and realize where you are at that moment in space and time and history. It's just absolutely overpowering experience, aside from the other reasons we were there.
So that's Apollo 10.
Cernan made his third space flight as spacecraft commander of Apollo 17. I'm not going to cover Gene's experience on Apollo 17 now. It will be in a later episode. In 1976, Cernan retired from both the Navy and from NASA and went into private business. Starting January 26, 1987, Cernan was a contributor to ABC News and its Good Morning America show for its weekly Breakthrough segment, a segment on health, science, and medicine. In 1999, he published his memoir, The Last Man on the Moon, with co-author David A. Davis, covering his naval and NASA career. On May 13, 2010, Cernan and Neil Armstrong testified before the U.S. Congress in opposition to President Barack Obama's cancellation of the Constellation program, initiated during the Bush administration as part of the vision for space exploration to return humans to the moon and later Mars. In 2014, Cernan appeared in the documentary The Last Man on the Moon, made by British filmmaker Mark Craig. The film, 9 years in the making, is based on Cernan's 1999 memoir of the same title. Cernan received many special honors during his career. I will name just a few of them. He was awarded 2 NASA Distinguished Service Medals, the NASA Exceptional Service Medal, the JSC Superior Achievement Award, 2 Navy Distinguished Service Medals, the Navy Astronaut Wings, the Navy Distinguished Flying Cross, and he was inducted into the U.S. Space Hall of Fame. Now I have a couple clips to play to wind things up. First, this comes from 2011. Someone asked Gene how he would like space exploration to continue.
Let's get on with something that excites people. And then going back to the moon is, I'm not just saying to excite people. I'm telling you there's for no other reason. Education may be the overriding reason. The stimulus to education may be the reason to go back. Plus, who knows? Is there water on Mars? Does Mars look today like we looked on this planet a million years ago? Is it, but today like this planet may look in a trillion years into the future? We don't know. And it's, you've got the best, most versatile computer in the world sits right here. And we got to make use of it. Just sending robots is just not good enough.
In the final clip, Gene expresses his thanks.
But I tell you, I stand here very humbly thanking the people in this nation of ours who believed in themselves, who, when Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon, didn't believe it couldn't be done, although he was asking us at that time to do what most people thought was impossible, because it's those people who gave me a chance to share with you and hopefully a lot more people some of my feelings and thoughts about what I think, not my flight, but the entire program of what I think is perhaps one of the greatest human endeavors in the history of mankind. And from a selfish point of view, I now have 5 grandchildren, 2 more, and who knows after that on the way. And they're all too young to understand that big white thing up there in the sky is anything other than Poppy's moon. Don't really know how far away it is, what it means, what it meant for me to go there. Someday, I want them and their children to understand the commitment it took by a lot of people and the role that their Pompey played in perhaps one of the greatest adventures in the history of modern mankind.
Thanks for listening to this archive episode of the Space Rocket History Podcast. If you are financially able, please support the podcast by going to the homepage, spacerockethistory.com, and clicking on the orange Donate button or the Patreon link. Thanks.